Hi, this is Camille Fairborn from Utah State University, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Cause Teaching and Learning webinar. We're pleased to have as our presenters today three individuals from the Scott College of Business at Indiana State University, Dr. Concetta DePaolo, Dr. David Robinson, and Dr. Aimee Jacobs. For today's webinar, they will be giving us a presentation entitled A Real Data Set for Business Forecasting and Data Mining Applications. The way the webinars work is that all listeners are muted during the webinar. You can ask questions at any time by typing them into the questions box, and we'll be sure to ask those questions towards the end and give the presenters a chance to respond. You can also use the chat box if you are having any technical questions. At this point, I'll turn things over to Dr. Robinson. David, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Here's our agenda for our webinar today. First, we're going to give you some background on the cafe. The data that we've developed here were created in the cafe through normal retail operations. The cafe is student run, and we'll go from there into some managerial questions that they've faced in running the cafe. We'll look at the data sets and talk about data mining and visualization applications. Then on to forecasting applications and a few conclusions. So the background here in creating the cafe is we were looking for a hands-on way to have our students create and implement strategy. It's a senior capstone course. They were doing consulting, and that's great, but consulting doesn't always let you get to implementation. And so we were looking for something that would be a little more intense and a little more hands-on. There was good timing in that the sandwich shop in our old College of Business had just shut down, and so we had no food service in the building. Half the faculty had left to go to a new building that had been remodeled, and they'd opened a brand new cafe in there, so they really weren't interested in operating anything in our building. So we thought, well, why not have a student team actually create a cafe and operate it as a kind of a business laboratory. So I had a student team put together a business plan. One of the team members bumped into the president, pitched the president on the idea. The president came up with the startup funds. We enlisted Sodexo, our food service operator on campus, to help us establish the cafe, and they were feeling kind of guilty for abandoning us, so they jumped in and helped us out. The students and staff of the university actually built the cafe space, and you're looking at a picture of this is our old cafe. Just at the inauguration, that's the president of the university standing right there. We operate this cafe out of our senior business capstone strategy class. And I'll just remind everyone that the president loaned us the money, and I wasn't tenured at the time, so we were definitely going to make sure that he got paid back. From the learning side, we created a learning laboratory, and the thing I really like about the learning here is that it seems so simple to operate a cafe, that it's not a complex thing. It's a lot like working in any kind of fast food operation, but doing anything consistently from day to day is hard. And the students learn that the details are hard to master, even though they're simple things. It's hard to do them very consistently, and they feel pressure when their friends come up and they want to buy something from them and they have to work the cash register correctly, or faculty come up and they feel like they're on stage, and I think that brings a little extra pressure to them, and they want to perform well. Also, the problems that come up by operating the cafe create interesting variations in our results, which leads to interesting data, which then we can then analyze and try and figure out how to do a better job. One area, we'll go out and do market research to find what new products might be of interest to the students, and also we'll experiment with advertising and see what the effects of different advertising techniques will have on our sales in the cafe. The main thing here is that the students control all aspects of the cafe. They decide everything, and so they get a real sense of ownership, and they treat it like it's theirs. The intangible benefits that come from having this cafe are that it's really created a nice space. Here, this is the area out in front of our cafe, and you can see the students sitting around having drinks and talking and working on projects, it's a great place for team meetings. So it really creates a lovely atmosphere for students to get to work in a team setting. And with that, I'm turned over to Aimee.
Right, so as David mentioned, the cafe managers, they had several concerns or issues, and that presented an interesting scenario for a data-driven decision-making lesson. There are 6 questions directly related to cafe decisions, and they involve the sales, the payment methods, inventory, and staffing. And this scenario gives real context to motivate data analysis. So the students are familiar with a cafe. It is an example of real data, and it's not the canned, clean template data that often is provided with textbooks. So the raw data, it is quite messy, and we talk about the data cleansing in another paper, but working with real data provides an opportunity to discuss this process with your students. And we, from the raw data, we did provide 3 clean data sets, such as the transaction data file, the time series data file, and the daily sales and donations data file. So you can use each of them as a whole data set, or you can section them out and use as smaller data sets. This slide is an excerpt from the transaction data file that can be used for data mining and visualization applications. And one application discussed is the use of data to answer the managerial question 4 from our paper, and that's about payment methods by day of week. So does the percentage of transactions that are made by cash versus card differ depending on the day of the week? We picked this question to showcase just because it's a good example of combining the contingency table as well as visual elements to get better analysis of the data. This slide shows the contingency table displaying the summary values. And you can see here, I don't have, it's kind of hidden. So you can see here that Tuesdays and Thursdays have more transactions overall. And then you can also see that we have a slider percentage of cash transactions on Mondays and Fridays compared to Tuesdays and Thursdays. All right, so this is also evident when looking at the line chart. So again, we can see that Monday and Friday we have more cash transactions. But interestingly, we found that the debit card purchases are quite a bit higher on Wednesdays. And so again, this provides an opportunity to discuss with students why this might occur. So could it be from traffic patterns? All right, and then other data mining and visualization applications that are discussed in our paper are about the amount purchased with credit versus cash. So do customers who use cards buy more or less per transaction than those who use cash? And then another one about adding an additional register. So do you recommend an additional register handling both cash and credit debit cards be purchased? Or what about a card-only tablet for processing card transactions? I'm going to hand it over to Concetta now.
I'd just like to say one additional thing about the data mining and visualization. All of these questions that we pose in the paper are actual questions that the cafe management had, and they use the data to just summarize, visualize, actually decide what they thought they should do about this. And so there are more detailed conclusions about these in the paper. I want to talk about some forecasting applications. And the one I'd like to start with is the sales of individual items. So one of the questions the cafe staff addressed or wanted to address was having to do with the fluctuation between days of the week. When should they order? How much should they have on hand for inventory purposes? Also for purchasing decisions, and also trying to figure out if there were trends or items that were trending over time, either increasing or decreasing. So they're really interested in analyzing individual items. This is a partial view of the time series data set, time series data file. I've shown here 3 of the most popular items: pizza, which is sold by the slice, packaged sandwiches of assorted flavors, and medium sodas. In the actual time series data file, there are 14 individual items, products that you could do time series analysis on. And I just thought that we would focus on pizza slices. And so when I use this in my business statistics classes, one of the first things I have them do, of course, is to do a time series plot of the data. And then we look for trend and seasonality. So I wanted to show the pizza plot here. This is a fairly typical pattern, that seasonal pattern that you would see in the cafe sales data. It's a little bit hard to see here, but the 2 high points where I have circled in red, those are the Tuesday and Thursday number of items sold. You can see here we're between 150 and 200 slices of pizza on our busy days, down around 100 or less on the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Friday being the lowest. So at this point, we talk a little bit about why you would expect or why they do see this seasonal pattern. And one of the things that the students will come up with, and because they're in the building and they have classes here in our college, they'll notice that there are more classes and more students in the building on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we talk a little bit about why that data, that pattern in the data is expected. So then we also look here and see, well, there might look like there's kind of a downward trend here. So this segues into creating a time series model to forecast the number of pizza slices sold. Obviously, depending on the topics that you would teach in your class, there are different forecasting methods and models you could use to forecast this. The one that I use in my classes is time series decomposition. We used a model with multiplicative trend here, and I've just shown the, this is a mini-tab output here on the left. And so once the students have looked at the data, gotten an idea about seasonality and trend, and then run this decomposition model, then they're able to get a little bit more into the analysis. So we can talk about seeing if the trend here is negative, we can test and see if it's significant. So it turns out about 6 fewer slices are sold per week over, and by the way, we should have mentioned this data goes from January to April. It's over a spring semester, and therefore we talk about why would people want to buy less pizza as the spring semester progresses. So we talk about weather and how weather influences sales. And so we can talk about trend. We also can discuss the seasonal indices to get an idea of how much higher or lower sales are on Tuesdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays are higher, the other days are lower. So again, we can use this. We can use this information for forecasting and for understanding patterns in the data. One of the other interesting things that we can do with the data is to look at the time series plots by day of the week. So for example, here I have shown the pizza, number of pizzas sold per day broken out by day of the week. And there are about either 12 or 13 data points for each day shown here. And you can see that we do tend to have downward trends each day of the week except for Thursday. So this is kind of an added twist that you can have the students look at and have them use that to talk about how that affects managerial decision making. So some conclusions that the students should find with particularly the pizza data is that they should purchase more on the busier days of the week, and that they can use a forecasting model to generate forecasts. How many slices of pizza do they need to order for each day of the week? And also during the spring semester, they should be thinking about ordering less as the semester progresses, except for on Thursdays. So kind of some interesting things that they can come up with by looking at the time series for this particular product. We have, as I said, there are 14 individual products. Right now I'm showing the time series plot of sandwiches, and this and some of the other data actually don't have any trend going over the semester. And so I'm showing here the decomposition model for this as well. This isn't a significant trend, yet we do still see some of the similar patterns in the seasonality. So sometimes what I'll have students do is to contrast some of the products that do have trend with some of the products that don't, discuss maybe why pizza is selling less, whereas sandwiches are pretty consistent in terms of trend throughout the semester. So there's lots of different products to compare and contrast. There are some other time series applications that we can do with the daily sales and donations data file. Here are 3 additional time series, one showing the total sales receipts for the cafe for each day, one just showing the cash sales, and one showing cash donations, and those were given to charitable organizations. And there are some additional managerial questions that the cafe staff wanted to address, including what are the busiest days of the week in terms of total sales for staffing decisions. And they also had some questions about charitable donations and how to increase or try to get people to donate more to the charities. So we do discuss these other time series applications in our paper. I think that brings us to the conclusions. What we hope that we conveyed here is that the data is pretty large. It's a real data set, and it's motivated by actual decisions that an actual business is facing. At least among our business students, we find that context and actual motivations for real decisions are a very important aspect of getting our students engaged and interested and motivated to study the data. So we find this very, very useful. Our students in the building are familiar with the cafe, they've been there, they understand some of the issues faced, and so it's a very real and tangible thing for them. There are multiple applications. The different data sets can be used for multiple time series applications, multiple data mining visualization applications. We also discuss in the paper, because at least the transaction data file is fairly large, we talk about how that can be used to discuss populations and drawing samples and representativeness of this particular semester's data. So we have some discussions in the paper about that, and if you wanted to do some sampling and inference applications by sampling from the population of transactions, that we discuss as well. So there are many different ways the data sets can be used. So there's a reference here showing the full citation in the Journal of Statistics Education, and our contact information. And at this point, we'd like to thank everyone and open it up to questions.
All right, thank you very much for this presentation. Maybe just my first question, and those of you who are watching and participating as attendees, if you have any questions for the presenters, please type them in the questions box, and I'll make sure and ask those to the presenters. Just as a clarification of where people, you did share the data with your paper, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I was looking online, and this is a paper from the Journal of Statistics Education, and in the latest issue that was published last spring.
I believe so, yes.
Right. So I just found it. The data is in the supplemental files for that article, if any of you are interested in that.
Okay.
Another question I had that maybe you could address, this is something you say your seniors do, but it sounded like from your presentation that you pull some of this data and use it in some of your lower level courses in the department?
Yeah. Actually, the three of us sitting here all use the CAFE data in different courses at different levels. So Aimee uses the data, the messy data that we did not share in this paper, but we do share in a different paper. She uses that in an introduction to information tools, like an Excel class, basically, for freshmen. I use it in statistics classes, different levels of analysis and different types of analysis for Stat 1 and Stat 2. And then David's class, go ahead, I'll let David.
It's interesting. In my class, we're actually operating the cafe, and what I'm finding is that now students who've come through and had either Aimee or Concetta in terms of actually working with the data in their stats classes get into the cafe, and then they want to grab data and start analyzing it as part of their stint managing the cafe. So it's kind of fun to see the data come full circle. And it takes I think some of the fear out of the students in terms of their willingness to grab the current data, which is we can generate some things right out of our point of sale system, and they'll go look at that with the lens that was created by having worked earlier with it in Aimee or Concetta's class.
I'd also add to that, like when I do teach the Excel course, we do take the data through the cleansing process, and we do some very initial analysis on the data. But we talk a lot about the data and the integrity of the data. And so, like, for example, some of the categories originally had maybe they were in as PPJN for Papa John's Pizza, or maybe PJN for Papa John's Pizza. So keeping that consistency. So I hope that by the time these students get to David's course, they're much better about putting the inventory in and keying those in correct, consistent categories.
So we have a couple of questions. The first one, can you show us, or at least talk about, the most interesting data result, in your opinion, that you've come across in this data?
Oh, geez.
I'd say maybe the credit card. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things was we collected data on usage of credit card versus cash, and we face this problem in the cafe of queuing, because of course everybody wants to buy during the 15 minutes, 10 minutes classes, and so we had a very fast credit card machine, and so there was not really much of a problem until the chip credit cards came out, and the chip card readers are much slower. So now all of a sudden we're facing long lines in the cafe, and we're trying to figure out, you know, how do we fix that? How do we make lines go faster like they used to when we just had a simple credit card machine? And the idea was, well, we could install a second checkout line, and then the question is, well, do you install a second checkout line that just does credit, or do you have to go full cash register style checkout line? And then the complication is, it's not hard to put in a second cash register. What is hard is to put in a second cash register that talks to your first cash register. So you don't have to manually enter all the inventory data at the end of the day for what you sold. So it's interesting, a simple little problem like queuing in the cafe combined with a change in the way credit cards are processed, all of a sudden leads to a several $1,000 expenditure, and we're really wrestling with how best to do that to achieve our objective, which is to just get people through the cafe faster. And we haven't made a final decision, but it's looking to me like the key step is we're going to have to go with both. We're going to have another credit card terminal and another cash register. And now we're wrestling with how do we get one that'll talk to the existing cash register.
That's very real life, isn't it? Another question, you've mentioned contingency tables and time series analysis. With this type of data, can multiple regression be demonstrated? For example, with binaries for the day of the week, and then also what software do you have your students use?
Sure. Yeah, in fact, in the past, I have done competing forecasting models, one using time series decomposition and one using a multiple regression with the dummy variables for the day of the week. They come out pretty similar, so there have been times when I've done both for that. I think primarily I've done total sales for that in the classes. Software, typically we do a lot of Excel, but we also use what comes with my stat lab, which is StatCrunch. So that's the current software that we're using at this time. In the past, we've used Minitab as well.
Okay. Well, that appears to be most of our questions. Let me thank you once again for presenting this today and for making this data available to all of the rest of us. I'm very excited to get in and look at it. And I thank you all for attending, and I hope you'll keep an eye on the announcements coming out from CAUSE about future webinars. We'll hope to bring you something great again next month. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.